Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this exclusive program focusing on the situation in Palestine. Joining me today is the Palestinian ambassador to South Africa, Hanan Jarrar. Assalamu alaikum and welcome, Ambassador.
Alaikum salam. Thank you for hosting us.
You're most welcome. Ambassador, could you share with us the current situation in Palestine following the ceasefire?
Well, the ceasefire has been into force, as you know, since Friday 2 a.m. And the casualties are very high after 11 days of consecutive heavy airstrikes against civilian targets in Gaza. 255 people were innocent people, civilians were killed. 73 Palestinian children were killed only during May and were identified as targets by the Israeli soldier, unfortunately. 45,000 Palestinians are left with no shelter in Gaza. They are sheltering in the moment and at UNRWA schools in Gaza. Many, like around 2,000 residential units were made into the ground during these heavy airstrikes. And the situation is catastrophic. Again, the ethnic cleansing is taking place in Palestine, especially in Jerusalem. Today, 800 Palestinian individuals are facing the same tragedy of ethnic cleansing by the Israeli authorities in Batn al-Hawa neighborhood in Silwan. Which is an area that is very close to Jerusalem. It's the same scenario that is happening with Sheikh Jarrah. So this is the situation in Palestine. Right now, the Israeli court took a decision to delay taking decision in the forcible eviction of these 800 Palestinians in Silwan. So the situation is this, a continuation of Israeli violations of human rights and committing war crimes in Palestine, mainly ethnic cleansing and forcible expulsion of Palestinians from their own homeland.
You mentioned Sheikh Jarrah. What is the situation now with the Israeli court decision in terms of Sheikh Jarrah?
The Israeli court has postponed its decision on the Sheikh Jarrah issue when the uprising started 2 weeks ago. But till this moment, Sheikh Jarrah under siege. No one is allowed to get out from the area, which was announced as a military square. No one can enter in. Yesterday, they prohibited Palestinian press and media outlets to go inside the Sheikh Jarrah. So the situation is still very critical, and we do believe that this is a systematic approach and a systematic policy by the Israeli regime. It will not stop here, and even if they postpone the eviction for the time being because of this wave of unwavering support for the Palestinian right in this regard all over the world, still they might do it soon until everything is relaxed in the context.
So, Ambassador, even though the ceasefire is in place, what you're saying is that there are hostilities happening on the ground.
Yes, of course. The Israeli hostilities never stop. As I mentioned, today it was the ruling of the court of Israel in another neighborhood under the threat of ethnic cleansing. And the court, again, because of the protests that were taking place this morning in front of it, the court took a decision to postpone reviewing the case. But it's a systematic approach. A systematic approach, unfortunately, to evict Palestinians from their own lands, from their own homes, for the sake of giving it to Israeli settlers, with the objective of making Jerusalem a city for Jews only. Unfortunately, this is the situation right now.
And Ambassador, just so I can understand from our side, when these court proceedings take place, is there any representative from Palestine side there to defend the situation?
There is always Palestinian lawyers who defending the Palestinian families, but most of the case, in most of the cases, all of the cases, the Israeli court and judicial system is in full complicit with the Israeli administration, with the Israeli army, with the Israeli settlers. So in most of the cases, let's say in all of the cases, Palestinian point of view will not be heard. When there is uprising, when there is people who are raising their voices, like what happened in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, things might be postponed, but it is a systematic approach, as I mentioned.
And Ambassador, in terms of information that we received, there's been some sort of banning on youth between the age of 18 and 30 from entering the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Are you aware of this?
There is always a systematic also trials by the Israeli army and the Israeli settlers to divide Al-Aqsa Mosque by time and by place. So this is not something new. This is maybe something new for you, but it is a systematic approach for Palestinians. Women go into one side, men go into another side, women go at certain times, young men go in certain times, old men goes enter Al-Aqsa in different times. So it's a systematic approach to divide Al-Aqsa, to avoid people going into groups into Al-Aqsa. This is something that unfortunately is taking place on a daily basis in the couple of past years.
And in terms of, Ambassador, the recent visit by the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, he indicated that they are repairing the structural, they are looking at assisting with the structural damage in Gaza and dealing with a humanitarian crisis. Have you heard any response as to when this will take place?
Actually, no, because he just visited Palestine yesterday. I heard exactly what you heard through the media, that United States is going to resume its relationships with the Palestinians. They will open a general consulate to serve Palestinians in the area of East Jerusalem, and they will provide financial assistance to start the infrastructure rebuilding again in Gaza. But I think this will not take place very soon. Hopefully it will take place in an immediate effect, but I have no information on the actual date to start this process.
And has the Palestinian government been engaging with the other world leaders as well as the UN?
Yes, of course. We are working on different fronts. We are working with the ICC. We are working with the UN General Assembly, and we have worked with the UN Security Council for a resolution during the attacks. We are engaging with the EU, engaging with the African countries like South Africa in particular. Of course, there has been an engagement on different level. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs is visiting some Arab countries for this effect. Yes, there are very heavy diplomatic efforts nowadays. We are engaged with Egypt, which announced also a package of financial assistance to start reconstruction works in Gaza, with the Qatari government, with Jordan. Yes, there has been engagement on different levels for this effect.
And Ambassador, with all the engagements underway and the diplomatic negotiations and discussions that are underway, what sort of feedback are you seeing from those that have been negotiated and discussed with?
The feedback is always in favor of the Palestinian support, and as you maybe witnessed during the past 3 weeks, people got out into their numbers in different capitals of the world, including South Africa was like a big example on this support. We are witnessing a changing in the public opinion in different countries, especially in US, maybe in Europe also. And in Africa, of course, it has been consistent with the principal position of the African countries, especially here in South Africa. The atmosphere and the vibes are good internally in terms of supporting the Palestinian people. Maybe it's more positive on the popular grassroots level rather than on the government. But this is what we have, and we have to work on this.
I'd like to ask you more about that, Ambassador, but we're going to join just after this quick ad break. Welcome back. Joining me today is the Palestinian ambassador to South Africa, Hanan, Jarrar. Ambassador, early on, just before the ad break, you were talking about the relations and how there is some sort of diplomatic engagement that is currently underway. Could you share more details about the diplomatic engagement, and do you see some hope from other countries soon?
Well, of course, there is always hope. We are Palestinians are doomed by hope. The most clear political engagement was by the U.S. administration, who sent its special envoy to the Middle East, to Palestine, Mr. Hadi Amr, to meet with the president and to meet with the Palestinian leadership. Then Mr. Blinken, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the U.S., also is visiting Palestine. He met President Mahmoud Abbas yesterday, and many good results are taking place. We have to wait and to see where this might lead. This is a good engagement and breakthrough in the relationship between U.S. and Palestine, since there has been like a blockade or a kind of freezing in the relationship for the past 4 years. Now the issue of Palestine is coming into the surface in the United States again, especially after the huge numbers of people who took street recently in support and solidarity with the Palestinian people. As for the EU, their position is still as is, a very cliche position. For South Africa, we are working with the DERCO and we are working with other parties here to support Palestine on the international platforms and multilateral platforms. There has been also engagement with the Arab countries, as I mentioned, like Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, and Iraq lately, on the issue of supporting Palestine. This is, as far as I know, the kind of engagement that is taking place. Also, there is a kind of engagement with the ICC to open an investigation in the latest Israeli heavy airstrikes against Gaza, which amount to war crime. So basically, we are working on different bilateral and multilateral fronts.
Ambassador, early on you mentioned that you were working with South Africa. Yesterday, the Deputy SG of the ANC, Jessie Duarte, she called for the complete closure of Israel's embassy in Pretoria and South Africa's embassy in Tel Aviv. In terms of your position, how do you take this call for closure?
Well, I do believe that this is something highly appreciated to be taken by the government of South Africa, but it is also something that they have the total freedom to act according to what they deem appropriate. I can't interfere in this. I do believe that the South African government and people are standing together and they know what to be done very clearly.
And Ambassador, you were talking about all the hostilities that are taking place on the ground before the ceasefire. In terms of those hostilities that happened during the ceasefire and the hostilities that are currently being experienced, is there someone or somebody within the Palestinian administration who is keeping on monitoring all of these casualties and the situations? Are they being documented somewhere?
Yes, of course. We have official bodies and we have shadow non-governmental organizations that represent us on different multilateral platforms like Al-Mizan in Gaza, Al-Haq organization in West Bank, Beit Salim Human Rights Organization in Israel. All these organizations, civil society organizations that are working on documenting and even oral documentation for the hostilities that took place and the violations of against human rights that took place in Gaza, in Sheikh Jarrah and in Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is something that we are used to and we do it very systematically. Don't forget that we are now preparing files to be presented for the ICC, and one of the 3 files that we already presented and we updating them systematically is the file of the war on Gaza. So of course there is always a documentation to be done on this side, and it is on a highly level.
You mentioned that there's files being presented and to the International Criminal Court. There is a document that has been filed here in South Africa. It's called the Al-Aqsa docket. I'm not sure if you're aware of this docket.
Yes, I am aware of it, and I talked with the organizations that they were working on it. At least not directly with the organization, but with the Palestine Solidarity Alliance, which they mentioned at some point that there is an organization or a body that works on this issue, and we discussed the importance of not wasting the time and effort of people working on this, and they have to be linked to the parties that working on this file in Palestine. This is our latest meeting. We agreed on this.
Okay, and in terms of the Al-Aqsa docket 2021, will the Palestinian government also be welcoming this move from South Africa?
Of course, any effort that exposes the Israeli violations and the Israeli atrocities against the Palestinian people is most welcome, especially when it comes from a country like South Africa, because we do believe that no one can understand the plight of the Palestinian people as South Africans, because they have been subjected to the same apartheid regime in the past. And they are the one, with the support of the international community, were able to bring this apartheid regime into an end. So every effort and every initiative in this regard is most welcome. We as Palestinians look at South Africa as a beacon of hope for our people inside Palestine back home, and for the 7 million Palestinians scattered in refuge all over the world. So definitely any effort is most welcome.
Yeah. And Ambassador, have you heard of any such docket also being opened elsewhere in the world?
Not really. I do believe that this is maybe because I'm not familiar with what's going on around the world, but at least I'm familiar with this initiative that's taking place here in South Africa. But maybe my colleagues who work with the ICC file are more aware of what's going on. That's why I emphasized the importance of making collaboration and coordination with the Palestinian counterpart in Palestine who are working on this document, so that not to reinvent the wheel.
Ambassador, we've been getting reports from NGOs working on the ground due to Israeli occupation that water and sanitation, medical, and even other supplies are being denied to Palestinian people. This is a basic necessity that people require. What sort of efforts are being made by the Palestinian government to try and sort this concern out?
Well, the Palestinian government is trying its best to always sort things out, but it's the Israeli systematic practices that try always to deny Palestinians access to their natural resources. You might be aware that according to Oslo Accord, our areas in Palestine, in the Palestinian land, are divided into 3 areas, A, B, and C. Area C compromise 60% of the Palestinian land, and Area C contains most of the natural resources for the Palestinians. And unfortunately, by the Oslo Accord, Israel now is denying us our proper access to our natural resources. That's why we keep suffering, but still we are like tied up by the Oslo Accord and by the regulations of the Oslo Accord, which gives Israel the right to of course, it doesn't give Israel the right to deny our access, but by de facto, they are trying to deny the Palestinian access to natural resources. And they give the Israeli settlers living in 30% of the 22% of the land of Palestine the upper hand to enjoy the resources like electricity, water, and many other natural resources on the expense of the Palestinian individuals. Unfortunately, this is the reality that we are trying to involve other international partners to try to find a solution for it, but it's a little bit difficult and challenging most of the time with the Israeli side.
Ambassador, I'd like to ask more about this question, but we will be back after this quick, short ad break. Welcome back. Joining me today is the Palestinian ambassador to South Africa, Hanan Jarrar. Ambassador, early on we spoke about the diplomatic efforts being made by Palestine to grow support and get support in terms of the situation that the Palestinians are faced with on the ground. In terms of Nakba, I'd like to just go on to Nakba, and this year marked the 73rd anniversary. How does it compare to current situations today?
First of all, we can say that Sheikh Jarrah and what's going in Sheikh Jarrah is the continuation of Al-Nakba. Because what has been done to Sheikh Jarrah is the same procedures that has been done to Palestinians during a Nakba or catastrophe in English, which when Israel came and occupied Palestine in 1948, what did it do? It uprooted indigenous Palestinians from their indigenous land and home and scattered them in refuge all over the world. During Al-Nakba in 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their home land and scattered all over the world in refugee camps. And now these 750,000 Palestinians are turning into 7 million Palestinians still scattered in refuge, denied the access to their homeland again, In other words, they are denied the right of return to their homeland because of the Israeli occupation. The same thing that happened in 1948 is taking place now in Sheikh Jarrah and in Silwan neighborhood in Jerusalem. They are trying to evacuate Palestinian families from their own homelands for the sake of Israeli settlers to come to take their places and to replace the indigenous people of Palestine with the settlers coming from around the globe. This is according to the Geneva Fourth Convention, is prohibited and is amount to war crime because the occupying power is prohibited from uprooting indigenous people from their own homes and their own lands and replacing them with the occupying power people. So it's like you have the same picture with time lag of 73 years. This month, May, we as Palestinians commemorated 73 years of Nakba. 7 decades were characterized by ethnic cleansing, apartheid regime, oppression, and systematic aggression against Palestinians. It's true that this Nakba is more or less very similar to what the Palestinians are facing now. So we can relate the two events by saying that it's a vicious cycle by the Israelis to maintain Jewish supremacy in the lands of Israel, which is, in other words, can be called an apartheid regime. And this is something that not the Palestinians said so. Two important human rights organizations have been talking about this. The first is called B'Tselem, which is a major Israeli human rights organization, that called the area between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, which mainly comprises the area of Israel. They called it an apartheid regime, not a democracy as Israel tried to portray it. Why? Because in this area, Israel is trying to maintain Jewish supremacy over other entities, mainly Muslims and Christians, Palestinians. The other important report on this regard was a report issued by Human Rights Watch, which took the title Threshold is Crossed, labeling the Israeli activities inside Palestine and inside the Israeli entity or the Israeli state as an apartheid regime. So basically, these are the different dynamics that are taking place right now. People are starting to become more louder about naming Israel what it should be to be named, an apartheid regime, and people are not fooled anymore by the mainstream media that always will mislead and give and mislead propaganda about Israel being the only democracy in the Middle East. Things are being exposed, and hopefully we can build on this exposure by the reality.
Of course, it's very important for the Palestinian government to actually, let people know more or less what is happening on the ground. So the diplomatic efforts are very good at the moment, especially when we are hearing differing scenarios from Western media where they were saying that it was Hamas that struck first, and that was why the Israeli government retaliated. And it is very, very good from your side to actually hear this and know that these efforts are actually being made at the moment. Ambassador, in terms of the settlers, in terms of the shelters that are actually being overwhelmed at the moment, how is the Palestinian government addressing the situation?
Which situation do you mean? The issue of
the shelters. We heard recently that the shelters are being overwhelmed at the schools. They're basically a family of, let's say, 4 to 5 in one classroom. Is there any sort of assistance that's been given to the people that have been affected, that homes have been blown to smithereens, and now they're forced to occupy one small classroom for their whole family?
Yes. First of all, I would like to draw to one important fact. Maybe people around the world do not recognize about the nature of the Palestinian people. In Gaza and in the other areas of the Palestinian territory, we have a very high social capital. So people are providing support lines for each other. During the airstrikes, families were going from their homes and shelter in the schools because they know that Israel targets will not reach schools, especially when it comes to the United Nations Work and Relief Agency schools, UNRWA schools, because it's a United Nations Schools Act. Actually. But now, after things are done, we do believe that only people who really don't have any other place to go to stay in the UNRWA schools, because at the end, UNRWA schools cannot really comprehend the 45,000 Palestinians who have no shelters but these schools. So because of the social capital is very high, and because the Palestinians support each other, because it's a situation of a catastrophe or a situation of war, Palestinian families can accommodate each other, their relatives, their friends together in their homes, despite the fact that the homes do not have that space to accommodate everyone, but it happens. Palestinian Authority, through the Ministry of Health, through the Ministry of Social Development, and through other different bodies, are trying to provide the needed equipments, gadgets, or necessities needed for Palestinians to survive at least. But it's not enough, of course. Egypt has been doing tremendous support for the Palestinians. They opened the border between Egypt and Gaza, the Rafah border, and they are letting support packages coming through for the first time, long time ago. So there is a kind of support that the Palestinians are gaining from different actors. But of course, the infrastructure is totally distracted. Even if we have support, we need more assistance to reconstruct at least what has been distracted by the Israeli airstrikes, unfortunately.
Ambassador, in terms of the access points and the ports, and in terms of the health of the elderly, can you tell us specifically some scenarios of incidents that have happened that you're aware of? Well, only sick people are allowed to go now from Gaza into Egypt, or some humanitarian cases. Otherwise, people are really overwhelmed with the destruction that they had. Some witnesses from Gaza said that Gaza is like Gaza 20 years ago, unfortunately, because of the mass destruction that took place because of the consecutive 11 days of heavy airstrikes against Gaza. 1,880 airstrikes took place in these 11 days. So you can imagine the amount and the volume of destruction that took place during this time. Ambassador, we're going to be back just after this short ad break, so do stay tuned. Welcome back. Joining me to discuss the Palestinian situation is the Palestinian ambassador to South Africa, Hanan Jarrar. Ambassador, I was reading a story recently where a lady had to take 3 buses to Egypt for treatment for her cancer. In terms of your knowledge on the situation in terms of cancer and the situation that people are being faced with cancer in Palestine, how is this being addressed?
Well, you heard about one story. Unfortunately, we have an endless number of stories in this regard. Palestinians are suffering not only because they don't have the proper access to medication inside Gaza, because the infrastructure has been destroyed, completely destroyed, let's say, this time. Palestinians can go either to Egypt through the Rafah crossing border, or they can go to West Bank, to the Palestinian territory. Mainly, Gazans go to a hospital called Augusta Victoria in Jerusalem, which supports the Gazans people in their cancer treatments and other kind of treatments. Unfortunately, the tragedies of the Palestinians coming back from Gaza to Augusta Victoria and going back is endless because of the Israeli restriction on movement, because of the Israeli restriction on goods, and because of the Israeli dehumanization of the process itself. Like, for example, if you are a child and you need to go to take a chemotherapy in the Augusta Victoria in Jerusalem, which is 2 hours or 3 hours by car from Gaza to Jerusalem, you are not allowed to be escorted by any member of your family. Even if you are a child, you go by yourself and you stay in the hospital by yourself and you take your medication only by yourself alone. So you can imagine the psychological situation of a child or an old man or old woman going from his own environment into a total new environment, taking a medication that is horrible, like the chemotherapy, for example, staying alone. This really triggers my emotion. I don't want to talk about it because I know many cases like this. The child has to go.
It's fine. Take your time, Ambassador. It's fine.
It's very emotional, When I talk about this, I talk about my child, God forbid, or I talk about someone who I really know, because imagine that your child needs to go from your lab into the hospital in a normal situation, and he has to go alone, and he has to be subjected to a chemotherapy and then when he's done, he has to stay alone, no support, no one. Of course, as I mentioned before, the social capital is very high in Palestine. We as people from West Bank and Jerusalem, we are visiting always, and I was part of this myself personally, and I am involved in this experience. That's why it triggers my emotion to talk about it. We were preparing groups to go to the hospitals and check on who are from Gaza, who are alone, what do they need, if they need some clothes, if they need some toys, if they are children, or if they need some support, if they were old. And it's always taking this in this regard. So that now you can imagine that the burden is doubled on the shoulders of the patient himself, because he has to go through this healing process and through this painful medication, and again he is alone and he is not escorted by any member of his family. And the situation now is even getting worse, because some of the people who were taking their medication in Jerusalem, and with the war in Gaza lately, there is no access now for them. They are finished their medication and there is no access them now to go back to their homes. So again, people are checking on them, asking, because basically they were left more for a longer periods that they have to stay because of the war. So people are checking on them, saying what they are allowed, what their needs are. So yes, the humanitarian situation is very tragic and it's very devastating for me personally as a mother and as a woman, and devastating in general. And unfortunately, yani, we hope we can come at least to some light at the end of the tunnel to end this catastrophe against the people in Palestine and in Gaza in particular, because as you know that Gaza has been under genocidal siege, let's say, for 13 years, and this war was the fourth year during these 13 years of siege.
You know, with all this trauma that the youth and the elderly are experiencing, as a mom myself, I can totally connect with you in understanding that it's such a plight that is being experienced there on the ground. And we can only make dua right now that things can, inshallah, change. But in the meantime, Ambassador, what sort of support do you feel that is required from South Africa and from the international community?
Let's start by the international community, then we go to South Africa to give me an opportunity to salute them for their efforts. Actually, what is needed from the international community is to stand up with the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian plight, and to try to bring Israel accountable for its deeds that amount to war crimes, actually, in most of the cases. What do the Palestinians need is to live in peace and dignity, to enjoy their right to self-determination, and to enjoy the right of returning to their homelands. As like everyone around the world. The equation with the Israelis, we always say, is that easy: live and let others live. Live in your state and let Palestinians live in dignity and peace. This is all what we're asking for. As for South Africans, I really would love to salute the South African government, President Cyril Ramaphosa, who really was very vocal about the issue of Palestine. And from France, he announced that Israel can be classified as an apartheid state. We salute, as Palestinian leadership and people, this principled position of President and of the government of South Africa. And as for the people, of course, it's an amazing interaction with what's going on in Palestine. We received many calls from civil society organizations and communities here in South Africa that they want to pledge support, and they want to pledge even financial support to support the situation in Gaza. We have been working with different organizations to provide some kind of medication and assistance for the people in Gaza. We are working on this in collaboration with the Ministry of Health in Palestine, who provided us with a list of needed medications, gadgets, and medical equipment. And we are working on with 2 communities and with 1 civil society organization on this regard. And please allow me to salute South Africans for their unwavering principled support for Palestine. And hopefully this will even take our relationship for a higher place, not only political, but also to make it more tangible in the spheres of economy, trade, tourism, culture, sports, and other difference, so that will make the 2 people even closer to each other.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your time. Ambassador, inshallah, wishing you all the best, and the people of Palestine, our duas are with them. And inshallah, we will contact you again to join us here on ITV Networks.
Thank you for hosting me, and sorry if I got emotional, but it's out of our hands sometimes.
It's fine, Ambassador. This is the truth, and that's what we're sharing with our viewers, the truth, what is happening out there. while everyone is continued with their normal daily lives, there's other things happening in Palestine. Hostilities is on the rise. So, Ambassador, we've just heard the truth. And that's what we need to let the viewers know. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting us.
Thank you. We've just heard from Ambassador Hanan Jarrar, a Palestinian to South Africa's ambassador. It's been an interesting interview because we heard about the trauma that still continues, the hostilities that still continues on the ground. So inshallah, all we can do right now is support Palestine in terms of what the ambassador was saying, that South Africa is sending supplies. NGOs are out there on the ground trying to assist. So inshallah, please try and remember them in your prayers this evening.